In the beginning, there was nothing, until God created the heavens and the earth. No, this isn't a video about Christianity lore, this is a video about Ultrakill lore. Ultrakill, if you somehow don't know, is a retro-inspired movement shooter created by RC Hokita Patala. I definitely pronounced that wrong, I'm not finished, don't sue me. Because Ultrakill is inspired by many boomer shooters like Quake, Doom, and Devil May Cry. Ignore that. The point I'm trying to get across is that Ultrakill isn't the kind of game to have much of a story. Booting up the game, there's no opening cutscene, no dialogue. The most you get is this startup screen that's not much more than a fun way to make the initial setup screen feel like an in-universe thing. Other than that, this is very much the kind of game where you open it, get a gun, and just go. Usually, there wouldn't be much to talk about, story-wise, with a game like Ultrakill, and if you don't go looking for Ultrakill's story, you can very easily miss the vast majority of the tale this game has to tell. Ultrakill tells its story through having surprisingly rich lore told to the player through environmental storytelling, flavor text, and books scattered throughout the game. Usually, it's up to the player to put the pieces of this game's puzzle together, but I know that many people aren't willing to do that. So instead of having the incredible lore of Ultrakill be wasted, this video is going to be my attempt to explain the entirety of the lore within Ultrakill, go over some theories, and talk about a few of my own personal headcanons. Ultrakill is also, at time of writing, in early access. Currently, the final 2 layers of the game and the final Prime Sanctum haven't been released, so this story is yet to be completed. But with that being said, I will explain everything we know as of June 2024. Spoilers. Duh. I started this video by referencing the Bible. It's a niche book, you might not have heard of it. Ultrakill's story starts at the start of the book of Genesis, with God creating the heavens and the earth. The heavens were made as a utopia for angels to exist within God's light. God's light is an incredibly important plot point in Ultrakill, and yet, for such an important plot point, we know almost nothing about what God's light actually is. We know it somehow keeps archangels alive, as when Gabriel is severed from the light, he only has a day to live. But we know nothing about what it is, how it works, and who can actually control it. Obviously, God can control it, but it's shown within the ending of Act 1 that powerful angels can control it as well. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's take it back to Ultrakill's story of creation. We don't know exactly when God creates mankind, but we do know that he quickly grows angry with the self-destructive nature of humanity. God decided to give mankind free will with the hopes that humanity would choose the path of good and choose to assist one another for the betterment of all. You and I are both humans, so I don't think I need to explain why God describes mankind as a failure and free will as a flaw. The testaments found at the end of the secret levels give us almost all of the insight we have into God's feelings towards humanity. God decides to leave humanity to their own devices and start anew with another world, another race of beings better than humanity, a race that lacked free will and followed God's law. Failure after failure after failure after failure after failure after failure after failure, the results refuse to alter. Uncountable cycles of creation wasted, uncountable formulas for a mind without free will wasted. These testaments tell us very clearly that God stuck to his word. He created countless worlds with countless different races that lacked free will, and all of them fail. After failing to create a perfect world that lacked free will, God begins to lose faith in such a task even being possible. So in a fit of rage over humanity's continued survival, the survival of the one race left for dead, God created hell, and in an incredibly important revelation, he can't unmake it. God in Ultrakill is not omnipotent. He is not all-powerful. He is flawed, just like how humanity is flawed. Countless failures to create a perfect race threw God into a fit of rage where he damned man to an eternity of suffering for what is ultimately God's failure. The idea of a god that isn't all-powerful completely contradicts the typical ideas of many of the major world religions and sets Ultrakill's god aside as a unique character rather than a stand-in for the typical notions of god we think of. This idea of a flawed god continues on and only grows stronger as the testaments progress. When asked why he would create such a thing as horrible as hell, God has no answer. No matter how evil humanity may be, eternal damnation has no justification even in God's eyes. The guilt of what he has done to humanity, the regret of not being able to undo what has already been done, eats away at God. God weeps over what he has done. He falls into despair. He loses all hope. He looks for a way out of the world he created, but in his eyes, he has only caused pain and misery for everything he has touched. Unfortunately, the terminals end there for now. The final terminal is not yet released, but we do know one more thing about Ultrakill's god. God is dead. Or at least, he is no longer present in this world. The Father's presence one day vanished from heaven, never to be felt again. The death of God causes panic to spread amongst heaven. A power vacuum to be filled once more, to replace the role God filled. But the replacement that answered the call wasn't one to be celebrated. The void created by God's departure was filled, presumably quite slowly, as will become more apparent in the next section, by what became known as the Council of Heaven, a body of an unspecified number of powerful angels that would carry forward the Father's light, lead heaven, and most importantly for the story of Ultrakill, ensure the husks in hell continue to receive punishment as usual. We don't know much about the angels of the council, but we do know that they command a huge amount of authority and respect among heaven, as shown by how subservient Gabriel is to the council. As far as we know, Gabriel is by far the strongest angel across all of heaven, and yet even he kneels before the council. I believe this is because the council somehow is in control of the Father's light. We still don't know what the Father's light actually is. We don't know how the council gained control over the Father's light, but we know that control over it essentially gives the council unlimited power over the citizens of heaven, and if angels don't follow the orders of the council, they will not hesitate to carry out executions in the form of severing the Father's light. I believe this is how the council maintains their grip on power, despite the lack of God's presence. The council ensure that those banished to eternal punishment in hell receive that punishment, and they send down Gabriel as their pawn to put down any perceived insurrection. The departure of God isn't just felt by the citizens of heaven. The sudden disappearance of God is felt by those in hell as well. Angels sent down to hell to make sure that the damned receive their punishment quickly return back to heaven in the chaos, and for the first time in eternity, those in hell can breathe for a moment. King Minos ruled over the last layer. As the judge of hell, he decided what layer damned souls would end up going to. However, he always had some sympathy for humanity. Minos didn't believe that humanity should be punished for being lustful. He believed that loving one another wasn't a sin punishable by eternal torture, and he seizes the opportunity. Minos rebuilds the lust layer into a paradise within hell and builds a grand city within the layer for the husks, now citizens of lust to live in. This is why I think the formation of the council took a long time. Building a city doesn't happen overnight, and yet the city of lust becomes a giant thriving metropolis. Of course, as we know, the council does form eventually. Of course, as we know, the council wants to make sure that those in hell receive their punishment. So of course, the council is not a big fan of what Minos has done to the Lust layer. Enraged at the news of the construction of the City of Lust and the Lust Renaissance as a whole, the council decides to send down Gabriel to end the Renaissance by any means necessary. Minos chose not to fight back. Minos believed foolishly that Gabriel would listen to reason. Minos believed foolishly that Gabriel would ever listen to Minos' pleas about the plight of man. Gabriel cut Minos down without a fight. The death of Minos almost immediately ended the Lust Renaissance. The citizens of Lust were once again subject to the eternal torture. However, this time, the decay of their hard work is now thrown on top of it all. Because of Minos' immense status and will, his death wasn't the end for him. What remained of Minos' soul began to form together in an attempt to create the first known prime soul. When a person has enough will, power, and status, their soul becomes powerful enough to exist without the need for a husk. This incarnation of a soul is immensely powerful. Powerful enough to strike fear into the council itself. The size of the husk formed from a corpse of a person is directly proportional to their will and strength. In other words, if someone is strong enough to become a prime soul, their husk will grow to immense sizes. The council decides to kill two birds with one stone here. They rush to imprison the soul of Minos before he can form into a prime soul, so he remains harmless within the flesh prison for eternity. But they make sure to imprison Minos within his own husk. His husk that becomes infected and controlled with parasites. His husk that begins to destroy the city he worked so hard to create. The terminal entry for Minos Prime confirms that Minos is fully aware of what his husk is doing to his creation. Minos is helpless within the flesh prison and has no choice but to watch his hard work get torn to shreds by his own body. With the Judge of Hell dead, the council decides to make Gabriel the new Judge of Hell. With his newfound status, Gabriel would continue performing the council's will and shutting down any other attempts at making life better for those in Hell, whether they do it through peaceful means like Minos, or whether they decide to take a different approach. The departure of God from the world was felt as deep down as the layer of greed within Hell. Greed was another kingdom within Hell, ruled over by King Sisyphus. Sisyphus was not a righteous person like Minos was. Sisyphus didn't care for the misery and the suffering of his people in greed. Sisyphus didn't really care about his own punishment. He found great enjoyment within the struggle, and with the departure of God, he saw an opportunity to fulfill his own selfish desires. The Greed Insurrection is portrayed as just that, an insurrection. An army of husks from greed, led by Sisyphus, on a mission to take down heaven and the tyrannical council that rules it. But I think that there is a much simpler motive at play here, a much more selfish motive. I think Sisyphus spotted an opportunity to have some fun in causing a war. Sisyphus knew from the start that he was not powerful enough to take down heaven, and he certainly knew that his army was almost useless against the power of Gabriel and the angels. But Sisyphus didn't care. He was bored of his eternal punishment, and he had grown to enjoy the futile struggle of it all. So when he saw the opportunity to do something new, to start a big fight, and to start a fight he knew he couldn't win, he took it. The insurrection swiftly caught the attention of the new Judge of Hell. Gabriel quickly went down to Greed to stop the war before it even began. Gabriel knew that taking down Sisyphus would cause the army to disband. Gabriel decapitated Sisyphus with ease, and the army disbanded almost immediately without their leader. Just like Minos, Sisyphus began forming into a prime soul upon his death. But something was different about Sisyphus. Minos formed into a prime soul because he dared to defy heaven and attempted to end the suffering of the people of lust. Sisyphus didn't just defy heaven, he actively sought to destroy it. The sheer amount of spite within Sisyphus meant that he began forming into a prime soul significantly faster than Minos. He was significantly stronger than Minos, and he posed a massive threat to heaven. King Sisyphus had the will, but not the power to destroy heaven. Sisyphus Prime has no such limitation. His soul was not imprisoned within his corpse like Minos was. He was placed in the flesh panopticon 2 layers down in heresy to make sure he is as far away as possible. The power of Sisyphus' soul meant that the angels were rushed to imprison Sisyphus. By the time they finally managed to place him within the panopticon, he had already begun to form into a prime soul, which is why he breaks out of the panopticon himself as soon as it gets slightly weakened. His corpse was strung up deep inside the pyramid he once used as a throne room. The location of his decapitated head is a mystery to this day. Hell is alive. Hell is sentient. Hell is a living being that became too strong for even God to destroy. How do we know Hell is alive? The enemies getting teleported to your location as you play the game is explained in-universe as Hell teleporting them to you, just to start a fight for entertainment. The doors locking behind you as you play the game is also explained through Hell locking them to force you to fight for its entertainment. The enemy description of the Minotaur has a redacted section within it that consists of 2 words. The first word has 4 letters and the second word has 6 letters. I don't think it's much of a coincidence that Hell itself perfectly fits this redaction. The husks in Hell that have mechanical augments like soldiers and schisms can also be explained by tinkering from Hell itself. Hell, being a sentient being, can learn of machinery by observing humanity and begin to incorporate machinery into its own creations to enhance them as fighting machines. This isn't the only case of Hell observing humanity to create horrific ways to torment humanity. Humanity's creation of the Gutter Man was such a horrific abomination that Hell took direct inspiration to create the Mannequin by ripping apart sinners' limbs and rebuilding them from mismatching parts or trapping a soul within the new abomination. The idea of humanity being capable of a creation so terrible that even Hell looks at it and recognizes how terrible of a creation it is something I will get into later on. Hell energy is the mechanism of which Hell does all of this. Like the Father's Light, we don't know exactly what Hell energy is, but we know it's used for a variety of different things. Teleporting in enemies uses Hell energy. Locking doors presumably also uses Hell energy. And it is my belief that Hell energy can be a replacement for blood as fuel. I believe this for a few key reasons found within the violence layer of Hell. In 7-2, there is a secret book containing a poem that I will go into much more detail later, but for now I am interested in a single extract. I believe when the writer, which is almost definitely a gutter man, but again I'll get into that later, states that they no longer need the fuel provided by the body inside of them, that this is because they are now being fueled by Hell energy. The body inside of the gutter men has decayed and rotted beyond the point of being useful anymore. I highly doubt that this skeleton, after countless centuries after the creation of the gutter men, is still producing enough blood to fuel these machines. On top of this, The machines of violence are simply too old to have made their way into hell naturally like the other machines. The oldest known machine that made its way into hell is the Sentry, but that was repurposed specifically for the Hell Expeditions. Remember the Hell Expeditions, they're going to be important later. The Guttermen and Gutter Tanks were centuries outdated by the time of the Hell Expeditions, and so the odds of this many surviving this long, making it this deep into hell, seems unlikely. What seems more likely to me is that these machines have been placed in violence deliberately by hell itself, fueled by hell energy, so they can continue fighting an eternal war without the need for fuel. Another piece of evidence I have for the machines in violence being powered by hell energy is the fact that the Earth Mover requires sunlight in order to be powered, but there is no visible sun this far down in hell. So the Earth Mover must be getting some form of alternative power source, and it's my belief that these growths that tie the Earth Mover down to the floor are there to form a physical connection between the Earth Mover and hell itself, to provide a large amount of hell energy to keep these titans fighting, to replace the need for solar power, to keep the final war from truly ever ending. The Final War is one of the most important and expanded upon events within the Ultrakill timeline. A whole layer of the game is practically dedicated to the Final War. This conflict lasted about 200 years and saw the first instance of blood-powered machines not just in the history of war, but in the history of mankind. The Final War brought humanity to its knees, brink of extinction, and in the end, the war didn't end with a bang. It didn't end with a purpose, it simply fizzled out after the destruction it caused became too much for the war to sustain itself anymore. The Final War is also based off a real-life conflict, one you've probably heard of. The Final War is actually Ultrakill's version of World War I. Now why would I make such a claim? Well, remember that startup screen I glossed over earlier? Right at the top, it tells you the version number of V1, 2112.08.06. It is known that the production of the V model of robots, the production of V1, was cancelled due to the war abruptly ending. It is known that the Final War lasted for 200 years. The format of 2112.08.06 is the same format of a date that tells us that the version of V1 we play as was made in the year 2112, 198 years after the start of World War I. Another piece of evidence? The Gutterman's terminal entry tells us that the Gutterman was used in the first era of the Final War, soon after it began, an era of trench warfare. What war in history is famous for trench warfare other than World War I? The Final War is a variant of World War I that doesn't end in 1918, one that escalates and escalates until the Earth itself can't take anymore. The Final War brought more than just the blood-fueled machines to the table. All of the heat and electric weapons you and enemies using Ultrakill were developed for the Final War, as they became more powerful and more economical than bullets when fighting Guttermen. The Gutterman itself is a very interesting enemy lore-wise. It was the first blood-powered machine to be created by humanity, and as is with most new technologies, it was yet to be perfected. In the case of the Gutterman, this meant that researchers were not yet able to keep a self-sustaining supply of fresh blood circulating around the machine. The solution to this problem is the reason Hell was so intrigued by Guttermen. The solution to the blood supply issue was sealing away a live person in the back of the Gutterman and siphoning away their blood to fuel the machine. These victims were kept on the brink of death to minimize their energy consumption. Not quite dead, but not quite alive either. Those locked away in the Guttermen claimed to be willing volunteers, heroes even, but in all likelihood, it would have been prisoners of war forcefully put inside these monstrosities and sent off to decimate their former colleagues. We don't know whether those inside the guttermen were aware of what was going on outside of their coffins, but we do have evidence to suggest that guttermen themselves became self-aware due to their blood supply. The terminal entry in P-2 suggests that the terminals gained their sentience due to the fact that they were powered by blood. It's not a stretch then to say that all blood-fueled machines gain sentience at some point. The secret book in 7-2 gives further evidence to guttermen being sentient. The book doesn't have a specified author, but from the perspective it's written, it can be inferred that it is likely a gutterman itself that wrote the poem. The poem is addressed to Mother of Me, and makes reference to pained breaths reverberating within an iron tomb. We know that those trapped inside the iron coffins and the guttermen were still technically alive and would have continued breathing inside the guttermen, but likely with great difficulty. The blood of your breast that nourished and warmed me only serves as further evidence to suggest that the author of this poem is a gutterman that has gained self-awareness and is fully aware that its own existence is fueled by the torture of its mother within its iron womb. The revelation of the guttermen being sentient gives much more evidence to the assumption that all blood-fueled machines are sentient, that all blood-powered machines can think and feel. This is further evidenced by the fact that some machines literally get enraged after you counter them in some way. They literally get mad at you as you fight them, which is a pretty funny way of making enraging an in-universe concept. Reading more of the poem makes it clear that the writer, again likely a gutterman, has gained sentience because of whatever it's keeping it alive. It is aware that the person keeping it alive would despise the gutterman and wish it never existed, but simultaneously it is the torture of the person in the gutterman that is what gives it its sentience. The gutterman seems to feel sorry for the person that gave it life, and so when the time comes that the gutterman no longer needs the tortured soul to keep it alive, it tries to make things right by crushing the skull of the person inside the coffin, ending their suffering once and for all. The lore behind the gutterman specifically is one of the darkest and most expansive pieces of lore that Ultrakill has to offer. The more you look into these machines, the more you begin to understand just how terrible of a creation they are. Understanding how the guttermen work makes it much more clear why even hell itself would take notice of the guttermen and attempt to replicate it with the mannequins. After the initial creation of the guttermen, blood fuel technology greatly improved, with the need for a living source being eliminated from later machines. However, the improvement of blood-fueled machines of war began a completely new phase of the war, one that would continue until the very end. The arms race had begun. Guttermen were incredibly powerful weapons of war, being airdropped into enemy trenches and clearing out entire trenches on their own, so the enemy responded with a new and improved machine design to counter the gutterman, which was creatively named the gutter tank. Quickly going backwards a bit, the gutterman is most likely a Russian creation as it has Cyrillic characters on its body, and the gutter tank has German letters on its body. Russia and Germany were enemies in World War I, so this just gives further evidence for the final war being World War I. Going back to the gutter tank now, the gutter tank kicked off the arms race portion of the final war. By designing a machine to counter the gutterman, the need for a machine that countered the gutter tank was suddenly needed. Then, a machine to counter that machine, and so on and so forth. We don't know much about what machines were made when, or even how many machines were created during the war, with us only getting small insights such as the Sentry being a product of the war. But we do know that this arms race culminated in the creation of the Earth Movers. The 1000 THR Earth Mover, also known as the Earth Mover, also known as Benjamin, no I will not elaborate, is the pinnacle of the arms race. Developed at the end of the Final War, these towering behemoths were capable of flattening entire cities in one go. These machines were so large that even the advanced blood fueling technology this late into the war was not enough to power the Earth Movers, and so they relied on solar energy to fuel them. This is an important detail, because the sheer chaos and destruction the Earth Movers brought upon this world caused a climate catastrophe due to how much pollution was put into the atmosphere from all of the destruction. All this pollution blocked out the sun across the Earth and led to the beginning of the Long Night. The sun was completely blotted out during the Long Night, and the surface of the Earth had sustained so much damage that it became uninhabitable for humanity. So humanity was forced to move onto the backs of the very machines that were destroying the planet. The Earth Movers came equipped with a huge energy shield to protect them from other Earth Movers. This ironically made the back of an Earth Mover the safest place for humanity to go in order to survive extinction. Because an Earth Mover was designed to completely counter other Earth Movers with its shield, the final frontier of the Final War was also fought on the back of these titanic beings. While the Earth Movers were locked in a never-ending stalemate with each other, smaller machines used the bodies of the Earth Movers as the new front lines. This is where the V model of robots came into play. V1 was designed as the machine to counter the Earth Mover. It's small, fast, incredibly efficient, and most importantly, it can refuel by absorbing blood through a new experimental type of plating. I say that V1 was designed with a specific task of countering Earth Movers because of our encounter with one in 7-4. Upon stepping out into the war zone, the Earth Mover immediately changes targets from its counterpart in the distance to you. Instead of aiming at the Earth Mover in the distance and continuing the stalemate, the Earth Mover in front of you almost immediately turns to V1 and prepares to strike V1, leaving itself vulnerable to the other Earth Mover in the distance. What I'm getting at here is this giant machine that brought upon the end of the world identifies V1 as a larger threat than another Earth Mover, which is why I personally believe that V1 and the V model of machines was designed with the intent to bring down the Earth Movers. However, the development of V1 was cut short by the sudden end of the Final War. The Long Night is what ultimately caused the end of the Final War, with the Earth Movers being reliant on solar power to stay running. They all slowly died one by one. With the war being completely reliant on these giant machines, humanity didn't know where to go from that point. So the Final War ended, not with a bang, but with it slowly fizzling out and extinguishing itself. There's a short book that can be found on the back of the Earth Movers we fight in game. There's only one page of writing, and the text is in all red, spaced, capital letters, leading many players to assume that this book is written by hell itself. War no longer needed its ultimate practitioner. It had become a self-sustaining system. This line reveals how, by the age of the Earth Movers, the war no longer needed humanity to continue. Instead, the war had become nothing more than machines fighting other machines with little to no regard for the will of humanity. Man was crushed under the wheels of a machine created to create the machine created to crush the machine. Taking this phrase literally, we can infer that mankind was not in control of the war past a certain point. It became more efficient to design a machine to design machines for the war. Ultimately, the machine designing machines would get caught in a runaway cycle of endlessly designing more and more powerful machines to keep countering the machines designed by the machines. Humanity lost control of the war at some point, which truly makes the Final War a war without reason. After the eventual end of the Final War, humanity was forced to face the consequences of the past 2 centuries of destruction. The war may have been over, but there was much work to be done before the world could go back to any sense of normalcy. This period of time after the final war was known as the New Peace, and in direct contrast to the final war, this period of time was filled with humanity coming together in an attempt to overcome the destruction the final war caused. Blood fuel technology was repurposed for a worldwide cleanup effort to try fixing the climate catastrophe and ending the long night. Despite the vast majority of blood-fueled machines being created during the final war, most of the machines we find in-game are actually products of the New Peace. Street cleaners were created towards the very end of the final war in an attempt to clean up the copious amounts of pollution within the atmosphere. The end goal of the street cleaners was to end the long night. It's unknown whether this goal was an attempt to make the planet habitable once again, or whether it was an attempt to prevent the shutdown of the Earth movers. But we do know that street cleaners were eventually successful in their task, and made obsolete sometime during the New Peace. Long-ish side tangent here, street cleaners are actually very interesting in the fact that they have the ability to vocalize to some extent. Vocalization for a machine is a strange phenomenon that appears to once have been experienced by all machines, but has since been discarded by many machines in order to save on resources. It is unknown what led to machines being able to vocalize. Perhaps it's a side effect of the blood fueling process. Perhaps it was simply programmed into the machines to assist them in wartime communication. Whatever the cause, only a handful of machines still retain any level of vocalization, and those that do still vocalize struggle to manage more than a few tones. Street cleaners, swords machines, drones, earth movers, gutter tanks, and potentially even gutter men and V1 all either directly vocalize or at least show signs of still being capable of vocalizing. It's unknown why these machines continue to spend resources on this unique ability, despite the seeming shortage of blood driving the machines deeper and deeper into hell in an attempt to stay fueled. Side tangent aside, humanity decided to keep using blood-fueled machines into the New Peace. Considering the destruction these machines brought to the world, it brings to question why humanity would ever choose to keep using these machines, but no answer to that question is given. We do know that the technology behind the machines of the New Peace is directly derived from the machines of the Final War. The V-model series of machines was initially created as the ultimate wartime fighter, with V1 being designed to take down Earth movers as I spoke about earlier, but with the end of the war, V1 was left completely useless. Not wanting to lose their investment, the creators of V1 decided to repurpose the V model to fit this new peacekeeping role with the creation of V2. V2 was designed as the ultimate peacekeeper by taking the combat capabilities of V1 and putting them into a more durable frame, without the experimental plating of V1. V2 ultimately failed, just like its predecessor, as it was deemed too expensive for a single unit to be used for peacekeeping purposes. V2 was thrown to the wayside just like V1, leaving only one of each prototype in the world. The V model was abandoned in favour of cheaper peacekeeping alternatives, like the drones and other machines that were either developed during the New Peace or repurposed from the Final War. We don't know how long the New Peace lasted, but we do know that at some point humanity was searching for a new source of energy to power their new world. And during this search, humanity managed to discover the gates of hell. Of course, humanity's curiosity was too great to ignore, and the Hell expedition started soon after. After the initial discovery of Hell, humanity set out to explore this new world as soon as possible. To achieve this, humanity started repurposing old machines to scout out Hell without risking human life. Street cleaners, drones, and even the old sentries were repurposed as scouts to lead the initial explorations into Hell. To accommodate this massive exploration project, a large facility was built outside the gates of Hell, which is later known as the prelude of the game. While we have no concrete confirmation that the prelude takes place on Earth, it can be assumed that V1 doesn't enter Hell proper until it opens the gates of hell, which means that it's likely the prelude actually takes place on Earth in some capacity. After the machines had made their way deep into the depths of hell, humanity felt it was safe to start sending manned expeditions into hell to explore it in more detail and attempt to find a source of energy for use back on Earth. But humanity was completely oblivious to hell's sentience. Slowly, the expeditions began to run into roadblocks. Doors would inexplicably lock with seemingly no reason, trapping explorers and machines deep within the layers of hell. Then, unknown creatures began teleporting in and out of rooms all over hell and within the Prelude facility. These creatures were hostile towards machines and humans alike. This, combined with the locking doors, meant that the hell expeditions became incredibly dangerous and casualties started to rise. The P2 ARG gives us probably the single best piece of insight into what happens towards the end of the hell expeditions. Hell observed humanity, learning from it. Hell observed the machines humanity sent into it, and learned from them. Spare parts and pieces of machines kept disappearing, and of course, you and I know exactly why this is. Hell was taking humanity's technology and fusing it with the souls of the damned to create half-machine, half-heart abominations like schisms and soldiers. The random teleportations and the locking of doors wasn't some sort of defense, it wasn't even an attack, it was for entertainment. With this new revelation, calls begun to ring out to end the Hell expeditions before it was too late, before Hell gained too much information about humanity. But it was already too late. We don't know what happens next. All we know is, shortly after, humanity went extinct. There are several theories as to what caused the extinction of humanity. Some believe that there was some form of machine insurrection due to a lack of blood caused by the new peace. Some think that perhaps Hell itself took over the machines and either convinced them or directly controlled them to exterminate humanity. Others think that Hell itself directly caused the extinction of humanity in some way, with it using the path created by the Hell expeditions to access the surface. There isn't any concrete evidence for anything regarding the extinction of man at time of writing. All we know is, for sure, that the Hell expeditions sealed the fate of man and led to the mass migration of what remained of the machines into Hell. With no life left on the surface, there was no blood left for fuel, so if the machines wanted to survive, they had no choice but to enter Hell. The main story of Ultrakill follows the only prototype V1 model known to be in existence, as it descends into Hell on an endless quest to kill everything it sees and make sure it has enough fuel to survive. V1 is shown to be much more capable at combat than every other machine, due in large part thanks to its experimental plating that allows it to refuel and repair itself on the go. V1 is in fact so good at making its way through the layers of Hell that it catches the attention of Gabriel himself. Gabriel confronts V1 in the gluttony layer of Hell, where he commands V1 to cease its descent into Hell and return to the surface.
Machine, turn back now. The layers of this palace are not for your kind. Turn back, or you will be crossing the will of God.
Of course, V1 ignores this command, and so Gabriel confronts V1 directly, planning to dispatch of the machine the same way he dispatched of Minos and Sisyphus before.
Your choice is made. As the righteous hand of the Father, I shall rend you apart, and you will become inanimate once more.
But V1 was different. V1 is the culmination of the Final War's arms race, a machine created with the specific task to take down an Earth mover. Gabriel stood no chance, and his defeat caused him to explode with rage.
What? How can this be? Bested by this thing? You insignificant fuck! This is not over!
I can only assume that V1 is one of the only machines Gabriel confronted directly, since so many machines are found in layers deeper than Gluttony, which leads me to believe that Heaven took specific notice of V1 and its destructive capabilities and felt the need to act. When Gabriel returned to Heaven with news of his defeat, the Council delivered incredibly harsh punishment, putting to use their absolute control over the Father's light. They collectively decided to sever Gabriel's connection to the light as punishment for his loss. The Council hands Gabriel a simple ultimatum: defeat V1 or he will die within 24 hours. This enrages and humiliates Gabriel and makes him obsess over the destruction of V1, not only to restore his life, but also to restore his pride. V1 continued its unstoppable advance down into Hell, even overcoming and eradicating its successor V2. V2, as I mentioned earlier, was supposedly an upgraded version of V1 with a more durable design to better fit the new piece, but its peacetime design proved to be no match for its wartime predecessor. V1 was designed for the war, within the war, to end the war, and its triumph over V2 solidified V1 as potentially the single strongest machine within Hell. Gabriel decided to wait down in the heresy layer of Hell to once again challenge V1 and attempt to stop its advance through Hell. Gabriel's monologue before his encounter in 6-2 reveals that the rampage of the machines through Hell is causing individual layers of Hell to go extinct.
Limbo, lust, all gone, with gluttony soon to follow. Your kind know nothing but hunger, purged all life on the upper layers, and yet they remain unsatiated. As to you, you've taken everything from me, machine, and now all that remains is perfect hatred.
By the time V1 reaches Gabriel and Heresy, both Limbo and Lust are completely void of all life, with Gluttony on the brink of extinction. Hell was not designed for machines of war. Hell was initially strong enough to keep the machines under control and even use them for entertainment, but I wonder whether at this point in the story, even Hell has lost control of the situation unfolding within it. After V1 and Gabriel's second encounter ends with Gabriel being defeated for the second time, Gabriel is forced to come to terms with the fact that he might not be able to defeat the creation of man. Forced to come to terms with the fact that he may die. Gabriel sits there by the fire, deciding on what he's going to do next. Gabriel decided to take his death into his own hands and send a message to Heaven. The council hall is stained with blood, and the screams of the councillors one by one get cut short. The last councillor begs and pleads for his life, reminding Gabriel that without the council, he will soon die. Gabriel is already aware of this. He has come to the realization that God isn't coming back, and that this world is coming to its end. With one final swing of his sword, Gabriel ends the tyrannical reign of the council and seals his own fate. Throughout Ultrakill, there are several different terminals spread throughout each level, and on a surface level, these are nothing more than an in-universe way to show the player important information and menus. But these little boxes are much more complicated than meets the eye. These machines are alive, they are sentient, and they are bored. Most of the information about the terminals comes from, ironically, the terminals at the end of the Prime Sanctums. This means that we are missing at least 1/3 of the data about these terminals, but already, with just 2 terminal entries, we gain a lot of insight into the purpose of the terminals. The terminals were initially placed within Hell to assist with the Hell expeditions. They served as a method of reliably transporting items through the different layers of Hell via radio waves. The original item is lost and converted into information before being received and reconstructed by another terminal. The only known item to be transported this way before the Hell expeditions were cancelled was a vinyl record, the song that plays whenever you open up the terminal in-game. The terminals use this music to lure machines towards them for reasons I'll get into shortly. They're only known to play an instrumental version of the song, but rumour has it that they are able to play the vocals when alone. Shortly after the end of the Hell expeditions, better communication equipment was developed and mankind managed to briefly remake contact with the more advanced machines. It's at this point that the revelation that the terminals are made sentient is made clear. The terminals are bored sitting in Hell, and so they seek entertainment. The terminals lure machines using their music in order to trade with them. The machines, in return, record their adventures throughout Hell and their fight for survival. The terminals will then watch the recordings for entertainment and grade the recordings on how entertaining they are. This is potentially the style meter that appears in-game. The terminals developed a crude social hierarchy based around how good the recordings they collected are. The terminals managed to gather enough battle data to create an infinite battle simulation for machines to freely record infinite amounts of fighting without fear of death. The terminals gathered this much data before the extinction of humanity, so who knows how much data they've gathered by now. All of this data began to make humanity aware of the sentient machines they accidentally created with blood-fueled technology. But for now, we don't know what they did with this information. We'll have to wait for P-3 to get the conclusion to this part of Ultrakill's story. Ultrakill is a very simple game on the surface. You get a gun and you go shoot some enemies. But if you choose to dig deeper, you uncover a vast world that spans several different eras, storylines, and emotions, while all coming together and combining into one cohesive narrative. Considering that it's the first game made by Hakita and just a handful of other people, the world building is fantastic. It was enough to get me to create my first long-form video essay. The first video I can actually feel proud of making and put actual effort into. Of course, by the product of this being my first venture into this kind of content, it's gonna be rough around the edges. I may have gotten some things wrong. My writing may not be the best, but I tried my best to get my facts in order. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider leaving it a like and share it with anyone you think may be interested. This kind of content isn't what I usually make, and as a result, this video is probably going to get buried by the algorithm, so your support would be greatly appreciated. And thank you for listening for this long.